Welcome to the Growth Leaders, the exclusive leadership development podcast where we host world-class leaders from various industries. Today, we're thrilled to have Aaron Redding, Group Talent Director at Tripledot Studios, joining us for an insightful conversation. Aaron, as a key figure in one of those leading gaming studios, Aaron's insight into the dynamics of teamwork and leadership are sure to provide invaluable lessons for our audience. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the theme of collaboration and cross-functional teams, exploring Aaron's leadership experiences and the strategies he employs to drive success in this area. Get ready for an engaging discussion filled with practical insights and actionable advice as we learn from Aaron's journey as a growth leader in the dynamic world of gaming. Welcome, Aaron Redding, to Growth Leaders by Shaws.
Thank you very much. What an introduction. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. You're most welcome. I would like to start off because people may wonder, this gaming company, Tripledot, it started 2017. So it's a young company,
Yep.
18 into its seventh year. It's been named by Financial Times as the fastest growing European company, number 1 out of 1,000. With a compound growth nearly of 800%. And as I understand today, you're plus 400 employees. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that must be a pretty exciting journey to jump on that. And my question, I'm going to jump straight into you, Aaron. This has to be a tech-driven company with so much beautiful talent. So how do you develop and thrive the leadership, the soft skills into that type of organization? It must be, a journey you're going through also.
Yeah, very much so. So, yeah, we've had unprecedented success really over the last few years, and we've been on a journey where we've scaled significantly and extremely quickly. And I think one of the challenges that comes with that is that when you grow at that speed and with that level of pace, you almost are playing a little bit of catch up in certain areas because all the focus is on the business and on the outputs. So there's various people I'm sure within the business who have in some cases have taken on one role, and then as the business has grown, have had to take on new responsibility, new roles, and also start managing and leading maybe much more significant teams than they were expecting to very, very quickly. So to some extent, getting management and leadership development up and running is one of the things we're actually working on at the moment to help support those people to be able to do their jobs even better than they're already clearly doing them. So yeah, a lot of work being done at the minute on that front. And one of the challenges, I think, when you've got a business this busy, it's moving at such pace, is also finding a way of including that within their already fairly hectic schedules as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lot of deliveries. And what I understand, Tripledot Studios here, you have had some remarkable games with Solitaire. You have this Woodruku, which is a development of the Sudoku, and many others in there. So there must be a lot of deliveries. But if you look into it, so 400 employees, that would mean that just average out 40 teams. And that's at least 40 leaders, which has been grown pretty fast. So what type of problems do you encounter when you head into this? Because now you are the group talent director, and there's a lot of thinking going on here.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider. For a start off, gaming predominantly tends to be a younger population. So you have the situation where if you take myself in my kind of mid-40s, compared to some of these whippersnappers who are coming through, I've got people who are leading teams in their mid-20s. So for a start off, you've almost got to think about their learning style and their preference for learning and how they prefer to go about doing certain things. Then in addition, you've also got to take on the fact that some people have less experience of having managed in any other role anyway. So this is sometimes for some people their very first management role, and they have quite a lot of responsibility for a number of different things. Then on top of that, you've then got the fun and games of cross-functional relationships, because you're working with different teams with different priorities or different values as to what they're trying to achieve, and having to make that
Right.
work. Because of course, across designing a game, you've got product people, marketing people, creatives. There's a lot of different skill sets and technical expertise going on there. So having to manage that, bring those people together to almost work in one direction is really, really challenging anyway. And just to make it just a touch more complicated, as if it wasn't difficult enough, we also have offices across the world as well. So you've also got the differences of time zones, you've got trying to schedule meetings, you have different cultural approaches to things as well, which when you marry all of that together creates this huge melting pot of challenges that can creep in at any moment. So equipping our managers and our leaders in a way where they're going to be able to kind of deal with those things on the fly is something that has to be a priority, I think, in any business. I suspect we're not different than anybody else in that sense, but certainly it's accentuated by the fact that we have quite a lot of different challenges that can creep in.
No, you may not be different in the sense, but uh, you have a creative environment. You have bright, young ladies and guys doing great work. I can sometimes look at my son, they are really into what they're doing, and then at the same time, there are fundamentals in leadership. I mean, it is there are studies by leading companies say, the main reason why people don't continue is due to their manager, their leader. So how do you approach this with those guys and girls who are to be promoted? Because I know you have said also previously, there's two ways. I mean, you can be a great specialist and have your career there, but
Yeah.
you can also move in the leadership. And, that's some analysis, because you may have and may want to have an aspiration being a leader, but you may be the brightest star as a specialist.
Mm.
How do you approach it and on that?
Well, we're starting to look at tackling it a bit more proactively. So rather than waiting until the person that's in the role is starting to think about what does development look like for those people leading up to the possibility of them going into that role, and starting to identify where there are people who maybe have a certain knack or aptitude for explaining things simply, or communicating well with other people, or working across different functions with, praise kind of coming from those other factors, those other people just saying, this person's an easy person to work with. They make my life simpler. They do great work. And it's looking for some of those traits, because a lot of the time, a lot of leadership is really around communication. As you know, it's like the number one skill that you'll pull on straight away. And one thing that does come sometimes with technical expertise, when you've got really, really high levels of expertise and specialism in a subject, you'll get some people who will make it look effortless, and they can explain it in such a way that anybody can sit there and believe that they understand how it works and they could do it themselves with a bit of training. And you get others who make it sound really complicated, but they don't intend to do that. It's just that they are so naturally gifted in that area. Their thought processes are honed in that particular specialism, that they find it very hard to almost strip it back to, if I didn't know this, or if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't understand my world, how do I articulate it in a way that they will fully understand and comprehend? So some people argue it's just talent, it's intuitive, it's just locked in, it's hardwired. I'm not necessarily of that thought process. I work on the premise of it's actually that it's so well practiced and so well honed over years of spending time on a training pitch that it's just become unconscious. It's just there, and they can just do it. And I think the same comes with technical expertise to some extent. For some people, what they do every single day has just been locked in through years of practice and honing their craft, to the point where actually, if you ask them to almost strip it back and to explain how they did that, they can't easily, because they miss bits out that the rest of us wouldn't notice, because for them it's just intuitive. They would just do that straight away because it's just become part of their senses. This is what they do. And I think then that's the kind of person sometimes that may struggle more with leadership and with management, because some of it is around leading by example, is around coaching and supporting other people. And that then becomes more of a challenge for them because it's stripping everything back and laying it out in its constituent parts and
Yeah.
going, this is how you get from A to B in the most effective way. And being able to explain that's really, really tough.
And that is also that the person, the employees getting to know themselves, where are their strengths,
Mm.
and then how to identify that. When you look at moving employees upwards um, in the leadership role here, what areas do you focus on initially? I mean, we know it's a lifelong journey on the one side, but
Mm.
there are also some fundamentals, as you say. I mean, communication is one. What are other fundamentals do you see here is important to get them into and actually get some actual training on?
I think there's things around being assertive. I think assertiveness is something that is often missed, because you've got to be able to challenge and you've got to be able to push back, but you've got to do it in a way where you don't alienate absolutely everybody else in the room. So I think that's
Mm.
part of it. I think there's an element of confidence. I think there are some things you can't necessarily train easily. I think some things are kind of, again, something that you would have to work on over a period of time, and you probably need examples of things to come into that. And I think emotional intelligence is one of those things that some people naturally over their lifetime have just built up this wealth of different scenarios, situations that have helped them to understand the world around them better and how people respond to it. Actually, I personally feel there's quite a lot of success from people just understanding themselves better, before they even start thinking about the people around them, because then it's almost like, oh, that's why I do that. You can see them joining the dots as you go through their profile.
Mm.
So that's always quite nice to do. So we use some psychometrics. And then in terms of the skill sets, a lot of it's around just confidence, but also being able to approach the way they communicate in the right way to get the right messages across.
Yeah. Okay. So that's uh, now you're the group talent director here, and you've had a career now for quite some time. Have you put in some principles, both for yourself, maybe for the organization, depending on how far you have come there, on how you want to approach your role? Because I know you also have some employees in your organization as such. But what principles are guiding you right now? And have that changed over time? Of course, it may change with the roles.
Yeah, I mean, it constantly evolves, and every business will be different in terms of how you approach that, because the relationships you might have with stakeholders, with kind of your customer base, all of that really significantly can shift depending on the type of organization you're in. And depending on their need as well. I mean, their demands may be very different in different areas. And I've worked across a lot of different businesses. In terms of technology, I actually have less experience in technology than I do in, say, retail. I've worked a long time in retail. So there are certain areas that I've kind of honed quite quickly over time. And there's other bits that I'm learning. So in terms of technology, one of the biggest challenges is working with people who are really, 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 really smart. Like I'm talking to people who are talking about subjects I have no idea about. I mean, I'm having to almost go off and check on Google constantly just to make sure that I'm keeping up with some of the discussions that are there. So then you almost then are looking at actually what do they need and how do you need to put that across to them so they can access it and they can get the value from it. In terms of values for me, a lot of it is around keeping it simple. I think the one that I've developed over time, and certainly over my last 2 or 3 roles, is around kind of how you work with your stakeholders and understanding what they need. I'm still learning that to some extent. I think it's an ongoing evolution with that, but I think a lot of it is just listen to what people are telling you, and remember that essentially that I'm a service provider. It's I don't
Mm.
I can't sit there and say that I generate X amount of money. The tracking of training evaluation, there will be lots of companies out there that can tell you, yes, I can put pound coins on it, I can put dollars on it, it won't be a problem. I can tell you what that ROI is. I'm not convinced. There are so many moving parts to trying to track learning evaluation So one of the things I have to try and work out is almost how do I put this across in a way where my stakeholders feel I'm offering some value for money. And it's difficult, very, very difficult part of what we do
Yeah.
every single day.
But what I'm hearing, one of your principles is being humble. Because I think it's one of the great skills you need to have as a leader, because that means, as you say, you're willing to listen, you're willing to learn, um, and the answers are most of the time within the organization. Uh, let's make a jump here. It's not too long ago you were in the other side of the world, Jakarta,
Yes.
where you have one of your centers, development centers, and it's a long time ago since I was in Jakarta, but it's a busy place,
Oh, yeah.
and I've been had the fortune to be chairman in Malaysia and Singapore, and of course in Oceania, Australia, etc. But especially the southeastern Asian world. You also have an influence of the Chinese leadership there. I don't know how that is within your organization, but um, it's different. And especially if we come from Europe, independent if it's Nordics or UK, or in what way would you say the leadership is different? And also, let's say we have some missteps here by the leaders. Could your reflection upon that, where you're now?
Yeah, Jakarta is a wonderful, wonderful place. It's the first time I've travelled that far. I normally haven't really set foot out of Europe. So for me, that was a huge kind of change of environment and culture. And it was wonderful to be there. And they made me extremely welcome, which was lovely because it was a lot to take on board and a lot to kind of understand. We have an office out in Jakarta. One of the big things there is that they just have a slightly different approach to how they deal with the relationships kind of within there. So the office itself feels very joined up. So they all sit and they eat together, they socialize together, and like even lunchtime is like it's an event. It's an actual time where people come together and they socialize and they talk, they communicate. Which is wonderful. And to some extent, I almost wish we could lift that and put that into other locations because it was just a really nice feeling. It was lovely. It was that everybody just stops and they go off and they are together there. So it's really nice to kind of see that side of things. I know every office says that that's the case and every business says that's the case to some extent, and it probably is in each of those locations. But truly, it did just feel like everybody just came together. It was just this huge social event, this gathering that everybody came together. And it gives people the opportunity to talk. I mean, granted, they obviously talked about things outside of work, but also about the work itself as well. And it brought different teams together, which was a really interesting bit. So it added value there. So in terms of that, there's some really great pluses. Another one is just they're extremely respectful. And to some extent, I think that brings its own challenges because then when it comes to things like delivering feedback, I can imagine it probably has some different nuances and challenges. It's something I'm going to find out about next week when I roll out a learning development program for them. But almost that, if you've got something where somebody is really just isn't delivering the results that you're looking for, I suspect that's probably going to mean some real challenges for the leader involved in that to then get that message across in a way which is authentic to that culture, to that location, to those individuals, and in a way where they're still going to be motivated and driven and still want to perform at the very best or look to improve that performance if they're not necessarily kind of hitting the mark. So yeah, it brings some different nuances sometimes to the way you design things. In thinking about how would you get that across?
What is the problem? I mean, if you have a performance call, I mean, we can be pretty straightforward. What you did great, and this is the improvement areas. You mean they don't do the same?
I think they do, but I think whereas if somebody if in London, for instance, if we were to have that conversation, I suspect it would go along the lines of not performing particularly well. These are the areas that we'd like you to work on. Tell us a bit more about how you're getting on. What are some of the challenges you're facing? You would have that kind of discussion and go around it. And I think that person would respond differently maybe than to somebody in another office where you might get a completely different response. And I think Jakarta, for instance, and it's my opinion, I was there for a very short time, so I didn't see huge amounts of it, but I kind of get a general gauging of it. Is that I think when that feedback is given, I think the person would accept it and then would just go, okay, and they would move on. And I don't think there's necessarily then the level of kind of challenge that comes in with that. And I think that's from both sides potentially, because the conversation's had, it's been received, and then they move on from there. But then what comes with that is that you then need that individual to challenge that and to say, oh, actually, this is where I think I am, and this is what I think I'm already doing. And so where am I not? And how do I change that? And what do I do differently? And the manager, to some extent, might also need to be kind of going in there and saying, well, actually, no, you need to be doing more here. I need you to push here and do it harder here. So it comes with, I don't know how to kind of put this across, but it's almost that they're not quite so direct and concise in their feedback. They're very nice about it, and I think that sometimes is the challenge. Sometimes feedback just isn't fun and it isn't pleasant, and it means that sometimes you've got to be extremely direct and just say, you know what, this doesn't work. How do we change it?
And it's many times more implicit. Many times it's also because they may not lose their face as such. And when we had a meeting with all employees, it was really impossible to be straight with all employees what was to be done, because then he would have lost his face, and then we wouldn't have a leader where there was the trust. So you have that complication in our eyes as a European, which you may not. Then you have to make sure you stand behind, and then you have to go through a lot of other stuff, to get the message across. Because you have to protect the leaders in somehow. Unless you want to do something totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it's that flip of the other way round. I find that people have this almost enhanced respect for hierarchy. And so they see each level of the hierarchy, and there's that extra respect that they apply to it means that sometimes they won't necessarily push or challenge or, want to be seen to be almost kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. And that comes with its own challenges because of the fact that you need sometimes, I think as a leader, you need someone to do that, to help you out a little bit. You almost need their feedback that helps you then take it to that next step. They're all just really lovely people. They all want to do an incredible job. And it's weird because that sounds like the perfect situation in a lot of businesses. And it is. It's a great situation to be in. But it does come with its own challenges, and certainly for leaders, because if you're constantly saying to somebody, okay, so you've spoken to these people and their performance isn't up, what's happening? Spoken to them, they've understood it, they're moving on with it. And you go, great.
And
that means something very different in both locations, because, for one, they've been told and they're going to deal with it because they've been given an absolute clear expectation of what's expected, and they've got objectives and they've got a plan. And the other one could be, we had a conversation and they said, yes, I absolutely understand that, and then they went off and they've carried on doing their job. And that's two very different scales of conversation.
But there is some, based on this discussion, some really great lessons to be learned for any leader here, because we have today many companies who are actually working worldwide and within the different cultures. And if you're a leader in Southeast Asia or in Jakarta, or you're leading Europe, handling those teams, we have to learn the cultural differences, and we have to learn the respect for it and how to communicate, because that's really where the things come together. And there's so many situations where if you are a leader and you don't take the time learning these cultural aspects, then it's a tough time being a leader in a global world.
Absolutely. And then we're talking about cross-functionality across different offices, and that's probably where you notice it the most, because you can have teams who are working in Jakarta, in Warsaw, in Barcelona, in London. And so you might get a situation where somebody has a conversation and then the outputs from that are skewed. There's something not quite connecting. And it's
Yeah.
because you've maybe got somebody who's been extremely direct in their feedback on one front, and on the other side of it, you've then got somebody who's receiving that message, and it comes across almost as aggressive when that's not the intent. It's not the purpose of it.
And
Even as something as simple as I remember hearing about a situation, not necessarily in this business, by the way. Just I heard it. I was talking to some colleagues who have a similar kind of challenge, and they're saying they had a situation where they spoke to one person in the department. They were asked a question, and they just responded with something along the lines of, "Can you do this?" And the person just went, "Yes," because they could, and that was fine. But the other person took that, because it was so quick and it was so abrupt, they took it as being, "Oh, okay, this is possibly, something where have I upset them or something like that." So they asked them a follow-up question, to which the person went, "No," because you couldn't do what they were asking. But again, they didn't think they needed to explain any further than that, because normally in their meetings, it would just be, "Can you do it? Yes," or "Can you do it? No." And that was it. That was fine. Everybody understood what that meant. And it created great consternation for the other party, because the other party were going, "I've really upset this person because they just said yes or no and didn't tell me anything else. I must have said something really out of turn." And that then just brings this hugely escalated situation, which is just caused by two people not necessarily communicating on the same wavelength. Because it's worth noting, apparently the person who was yes and no was equally as bemused by the fact the other person seemed to be taking great umbrage with this, because it was, "What do they want from me? They asked me for an answer and I told them the answer." And so bringing those two people and developing them, how to develop them is two very different things. Because one, it's around, actually, don't worry, because sometimes you're going to get really, really direct feedback, but that's fine, because all they're doing is just getting straight to the point. And for the other ones, it's actually sometimes you need to give them a little bit more information, or you might need to take into account that your yes might not be necessarily viewed as being that you're being helpful. You might actually also need to explain why you can do it, or if there's anything else they need to consider. So it's it's the kind of funny thing with this type of stuff.
And now we're talking then about, a pretty big distance, Asia and Europe, but you have exactly the same in Europe. If we look, we can put UK and French people together, or we can put German and French people. No, it's okay. And then you have the Nordics. People say, yeah, that's the same. So getting to know these and being very aware about cultural differences. So before we move to an end, I have to ask you, have you entered and start using any artificial intelligence in leadership development training as of yet?
A little. So I mean, AI comes. I work across talent acquisition and talent development. So for talent acquisition, AI is absolutely right in there. Lots of platforms operate with it, and then note taking has become revolutionized with the introduction of AI. Mainly because it just speeds that process up quite significantly. It means you can send out feedback that is just so much easier to work with. And in a much quicker time. So it saves us a ton of time on that front. In terms of leadership development, most learning management platforms or learning experience platforms now are introducing AI. The one we use is no different. So that's starting to look at how can we potentially utilize that and get the best out of it. And a lot of there's lots of tools out there. I mean, lots of different resources that you can potentially pull into it, but it's something we're only starting to kind of just touch upon. It's a fairly new area for us to get into. AI for us, the priority really was looking at how AI can help us as an organization in other areas. So it's something I'm starting to look into and see where there are opportunities to start adding more value in that field.
That's interesting, because we're just launching the other day a new course is within performance management for leaders, and then also introducing where you have the complete training, but in the end you may have your own specific situation, and you really will actually get some more out of it. And there you have a fully integrated ChatGPT. So I have this situation, and then you can actually get a response back with all the potential, and of course with its limitation, but it adds this extra flavor to a great training, and then being able to do your own small add-ons into that.
It's great for
I think, yeah, Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's great for doing that. It's also really helpful also for pulling together training resources to support your training as
Mm.
well.
So before we end this, is there any during your career where you really smashed it in a negative way, where we took a decision or as a leader, so it didn't go the way you were, and what were the learning lessons out of that?
Oh, I mean,
Have you reflected on
oh,
that? But sometimes,
crikey.
there are decisions.
Reflect on it. I go to bed every night, and it's the last thing I think about. It just happens in like a screenshot that keeps just changing every night, so I get a new one. Um, I'm a firm believer you learn more from your mistakes than you do your successes to some extent. And there have been multiple ones. There have been conversations that I've had that have not played out the way I wanted them to. There are rollouts that didn't work as effectively as I would have liked. There are systems that have been implemented and you suddenly realize that actually nobody's using them and you think, well, why is that? And you realize there's a really fundamental stage missing. I think the biggest thing that will keep me awake at night is the ones where I've not managed to achieve stakeholder buy-in in the right way, where I've ploughed on going, it'll be fine, it'll be okay. Once it's there, it'll be too late. And that's always a mistake. You have to have full stakeholder buy-in before you even start with anything. It's just impossible to get it back later. And it's even harder when you are trying to do something and then the people who are most important to that process are always saying to you, yeah, but this isn't something you didn't even ask us. Like, you didn't even get our view or our opinion. And I would say that when it comes to that stuff as well, don't trust anybody else to do it for you. Always make sure you've had the conversations. Make sure you're involved. Even if you've got a project team on it, make sure you've had a few discussions here and there to get a general sense of where are people's heads at and how are they feeling about certain things. Because that way then you can go in with a really clear picture of what it is you're trying to do, which makes a huge, huge difference. But yeah, never underestimate the power of stakeholder engagement, because they will bury you and it'll be successful.
Any organization today runs projects everywhere, and your advice here, make sure you have the stakeholders backing you, so you actually get a successful output in the end. Aaron, it's just great having you on Growth Leaders, and thank you so much for today. And wish you and your team the best luck in your continued growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.